to another episode of We As. I am your host today, Aaliyah, and with me, I'm going to change things up a little bit. I'm going to have a private conversation and welcome you into my living room with my sister, who is technically my sister-in-law, but one of the best blessings from getting married that I could ever ask for. So without further ado, Anisha, nice to have you on the show.
Oh, thanks, Aaliyah. Thanks, sister.
So, I wanted to start off this show because, first of all, I know this is a show that you've been listening to for some time. You listened to a few episodes, you've supported me through it, but I think you started listening before I even became an official host. And, you were on a journey for yourself in that time because the pandemic, well, it's hit all of us in different ways. How has the show benefited you, and what does it mean for you to be on the show as opposed to being on the listener end from being on the speaking end?
I absolutely just kind of love the topics. It was just more at first of kind of a distraction to kind of get my mind, kind of stopping from wandering. And so just listening to the podcast and listening to the voices just kind of helped overall. But just the general topics, like, the fact that you bring in people that, we know, like Farhan, like Slim, it was just kind of amazing to just kind of hear those voices and just listen to their personal stories. Because, a lot of these people, I even know, I know you as my sister, but I think there's things that you mention, throughout the podcast, with Gareth at the time that, hey, things that kind of surprised me as well. So I got to learn a lot about you as well. I got to learn, some stuff about Anish, who is my brother. And I just think the interaction between you and Gareth was really helpful. I think you guys just, you guys worked really well together. And the funny thing is that, it was just more the voices. Like, I find both of your voices super soothing. So often I would just kind of lay on the couch and it would be an hour of me being able to just take some me time, listening to some great advice, and just kind of letting it soak in a bit.
First of all, thank you for all of that praise. I know Gareth is going to listen to this episode when it gets aired. He's going to be like, I love her. But you talk about voices in your head. And I have to be honest, for myself, I have a hard time quieting the voices on my head, or literally quieting my mind from not being on overdrive constantly. Anyone who's very close to me knows that my mind is constantly wandering, constantly thinking, whether it's work, personal, doesn't matter. It's just something that happens. For you, when you talk about the voices in your head, is it constant for you? Does it come in waves? Is it triggered by something?
Yeah, I mean, through the pandemic, I think I learned how vulnerable I actually am. And I realized that your mind can do some crazy things to you. And the wandering, going down that spiral seems to be something that I would constantly go through during the pandemic. And it's funny because I would read all the articles and be like, oh, journaling, meditating. Oh yeah, going for a walk. Yeah, that sounds great. Like, those just sound like the normal things everybody does. But I will say that those are the things that work for me. I used to wake up at 6 o'clock every single morning and go for a sunset walk, sometimes with a buddy, socially distanced, of course, and just get away from the house. I hated sometimes, just being stuck in the house. I live in a 600 square foot condo. It's not always easy, and feeling so isolated. So just getting out was really, really helpful. I live relatively close to the lakeshore, so just seeing the water every single day was extremely helpful. And then just also, I think the biggest thing was a little bit of journaling here and there. Like, I know people write it out. I use my phone a lot of the times to just kind of jot down thoughts. Sometimes the thoughts that you don't really want to share with anybody, or something you can share just with your phone. I felt that was really, really helpful, because a lot of the times, during that time, you'd have these points where you'd get very emotional and you don't know how to assess your emotions. And from there, it kind of turns into, well, what do I do with these emotions? And for me, I found it often, hard at first to really just kind of sit with your emotions, accept your emotions, and kind of move forward from there. So journaling really, really helped, just kind of letting my thoughts out. Things I wouldn't want to say to somebody, I could just write it out, I felt like that was probably one of the most helpful things. And to be honest, the last thing, and I think for me the most helpful thing of all was just talking to people around me as well. I never used to be the type of person that would reach out to people when I was in need. I was embarrassed often. It just wasn't something that was part of my personality traits. And then I think just kind of through the pandemic, I learned that, asking for help is okay. And I did it a lot during that time, especially when, my mind would wander and I just needed to just talk to somebody, FaceTime somebody, anything like that. I found great support through that, and would help with the spiraling, help me gain control of my thoughts again, and kind of move forward from there.
I'm so proud of you for being so authentic and open with that, because vulnerability, you started off by saying you are a vulnerable person. First of all, owning that is so hard because it allows you to see, for lack of a better term, and some people will interpret it, or I think what we can confess to with our upbringing, sometimes it's seen as a weakness to show our vulnerability. So we always try to put on this tough exterior for how we handle things, or because of the things that we've gone through in our past, we almost condition ourselves to be tough and to be strong. And I think this pandemic, especially with you living on your own, it kind of forced us to live through some of the emotions that we experience and not be able to hide away from them. I find that when life was normal, it'd be easy to be like, call up a buddy and be like, let's go somewhere, distract me, or let me go out, or let me make this plan, or let me go book a trip. And in the pandemic, none of those things that were typical things that we would be able to do as a distraction, as an escape, were things that we could. So we were left to having to almost deal with it, or having to figure out what works for me. And the other aspect is, I don't know about you, and I actually maybe I do know about you, but our listeners don't know about you, is that sometimes when we write it out, it's just the act of letting it out that lets our emotions kind of settle. And then the emotions that arise maybe towards other people or towards the circumstance, all that anger and aggression is taken out on your phone or on a piece of paper, as opposed to maybe a person. And I feel like that actually strengthens relationships. Did you find that worked for you? Or did you feel like from developing that habit when you need to, that it helps?
Definitely. Because the thing is that I'm a very reactive person, I guess. So when, the first thing I want to do is, get my emotions out and tell somebody how I really feel, and, just go off basically, right? If they put me in a position where I feel the need to do that. And then with kind of learning that obviously you're not getting the best responses by doing that, which I wasn't. But I really didn't know how to manage it for so long. And it wasn't until the pandemic really happened where I was like, okay, well, maybe it's time, instead of just lashing out, because really in the end, you need the support of the people around you. And yes, you're in kind of a scary place right now, but everybody around you is more there to support you. It's easy to then just, pick up my phone or pick up a notepad and, maybe write down the things that I'm disappointed about in a specific person, or, if they text me in a certain manner, my initial reaction would be to be aggressive and text back. But, I've learned that giving them an hour, or giving yourself an hour to just chill before you respond, and maybe writing it out, which is I do a lot of the times. The amount of text messages that I have in my phone that have gone unsent, but it helps me through, right? It helps me calm myself so that when I speak to somebody, I'm able to do so in a more rational way. I still have a lot of work to do. I'm not perfect, but it has definitely helped in a lot of the discussions I have with people, the conversations I have with people. And it's just not about immediately reacting to something, right? It's about assessing it, sitting with it, and then writing it down to see what your initial reaction is. The funny thing you'll find is when you write something down, it might be super mean when you first write it down. And then if you take a look at that message just an hour later, I think like how you reacted to that text completely changes. You give yourself that time to really, like I said, sit with it. And then, that text message that you would have sent an hour ago probably is nothing in comparison to what you are now going to send that person, because, you've had the time to kind of just sit with it for a bit.
I think my favorite thing that you said in that whole section is that give yourself an hour. You started by saying give them an hour. And it's more like we have to give ourselves time. I feel like we constantly feel that we need to be accessible and we have so many ways to be accessible. And so we think that we're being rude or disrespectful by spacing out when we respond, or we're so used to, oh, we get an email for work, we got to respond right back, or you're on Teams online, or you have your cell phone, there's so many ways to get in touch with someone. And I feel that when emotions are heated, the best thing we can do is to kind of let our emotions settle in and kind of be aware of what we're feeling, let it out, don't send it, let it out, don't send it, and then come back and look at it and be like, do I really feel this way? Or did I feel this way with all the passion I was feeling in that moment? Mm-hmm. And I feel like that saves relationships. I feel like that saves
100.
And when I say relationships, I'm not just saying romantic relationships. I think relationships with coworkers, siblings, family members, friends. Oftentimes I feel that friends are the ones at times that might be the most demanding or want that response right away because they know our schedules, they're hoping to meet up with us, or they know our patterns. And when they don't get that response, we almost feel like, oh, they're going to know. But the reality is we're going to show up better when we give ourselves time. And it doesn't always have to be an hour. Sometimes it might actually have to be a day. Sometimes it might be 10 minutes, but doing that makes a big difference. So I love that you said that, because I think that is some great advice that I still have to remind myself to do at times. Sometimes I get so caught up with being so accessible that's like, why am I texting and walking right now when I could just text after I get to my destination?
I think a lot of people also have issues when it comes down to boundaries. Like, I know in the past I used to be such a people pleaser. I'm such an empath in the end that I want to help in any way that I can. And the reality is if you give some other people so much of yourself, then what do you leave for yourself? And the reality is that, sometimes, like you said, everybody has access to you, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to give them the access to you, right? And things like saying no, putting up your boundaries, and surrounding yourself with the right people that understand your boundaries, I think is a huge thing. As you grow up, people become a little bit more understanding of. I'm the type of person that, gets socially drained. So, after a couple of days of socialization, I kind of need to step back, take a few days for myself. And it's nothing to the detriment of my friends or the people around me or anything like that. It's just what I'm doing in order to recharge, rejuvenate, and come out to them as a better person, or as the same person I was when we first started hanging out, right? I think boundaries are a huge, huge thing. I think a lot of people feel like you need to say yes, you need to always be available to people. And I've learned, over the past year, especially, that it's just not what needs to be. You need to take care of yourself. You need to ensure that you set your boundaries so that you're successful for yourself as well, not just for other people.
It's something that's so easily said, but something that's so difficult to do. And it's something you have to constantly remind yourself to do. And it's hard to know when you need to put those boundaries in too, because sometimes you just want to be that giver or help out or not let someone down or whatever that reason may be. And you really got to think about, how is this impacting me and how I can show up? And that's a hard thing to do. You referenced that you learned how to do this year. I guess my first question would be, because I think I'm even guilty, so you might even be giving me some advice on this one, is how did you know when it was time to set boundaries? What were signs for you that you realized, whether it was in friendships or relationships or whatever, had work even, how did you know, what were signs for you that you needed to be like, no, I can't do this anymore. I need to set boundaries.
I realized that I have intensive attachment issues. And I realized that I attach my happiness to other people, especially when I'm in a relationship. I attach my happiness to my partner. And I think that makes it tough to sometimes create those boundaries, because in the end you have such like, I'm a social person. I need the question again.
No worries. Question is, that, how did you know for yourself during this year that it was time to set boundaries, whether that was in your work or in your friendships or in your relationship? Like, how did you know that you needed to make that change? You needed to actually start to set boundaries for yourself.
So the biggest thing with me was that I have massive attachment issues, and I learned that last year, especially, is that I attach myself and I generate happiness in myself by attaching myself to somebody. But the problem with that is when that person leaves, or if that person can't be there for you as much as you need them to, well, what do you do then? You know, how do you manage it then? And I think with my attachment issues, I realized that I do need to have boundaries, because even though I love this person, or I really like this person, or whatever the case may be, I need to set my own personal boundaries, because I know in myself that the attachment becomes very great. And if somebody is, I'm extremely attached to, in the end, lets me down or whatever, I took it super hard. And I think when you create boundaries, you don't take things quite as harshly, because then you start to realize that, hey, I have boundaries, and that person probably has boundaries as well. And I think recognizing that it's not always you, that the other person might be going through their own stuff as well, is really kind of setting the tone for when you need to start developing boundaries, and understanding, what makes you comfortable, what makes you uncomfortable. Is attachment a problem? And if it is, creating boundaries where you spend some time with yourself. I think that was the biggest thing for me, especially last year, was I had no idea how to be alone. And I used work, I used my social life, I used everything as a means to distract me from the loneliness I think I felt. And then through the pandemic, you realize, well, you can't have that social aspect. I had a partner, super attached. Obviously, during COVID, it was really tough. But if the person is not there anymore, again, like it's so tough to then realize that you need to actually set boundaries for yourself when it comes down to the people around you. You can't always be available. You can't always need to go out. Just spending some time in your own home by yourself with the cell phone turned off or on silent or whatever. Create that boundary for yourself, so that you create an attachment with yourself. You start to rely on yourself. You start to look at things around the house. Like, I did so much to my place. I lived in this place for about 5-6 years and didn't do anything to it. I didn't paint it. It basically looked like the same almost from the day that I moved in. And I told myself, well, now I have the time, that I can now enforce boundaries, because it was a little bit easier, obviously, during the pandemic. And I'm going to work on my place. I repainted the whole thing. I got new furniture. I did everything that I wanted to see in this place. And I don't think that necessarily would have happened if I didn't have the right boundaries in place.
I can so relate to what you're saying. I am in my relationships previously, I don't even think I knew boundaries were a thing in my relationships. I was someone who's like, I'm going to give this person my all. If I'm in, I'm all in. And I used to actually boast about that when I was younger. And in these relationships, I'd be like, I'm all in. I'm so committed. Like, this is what it is. I'm head over heels for this person. And that's what I had attached. I would make my social life around that person. I would make sure I'm making time. And it almost became that the person that I was with I was living my life for them as opposed to living a life with them. Mm-hmm. And when those relationships ended, especially one of my last relationships prior to the one I'm in now, I really realized that, why do I keep on having these hard breakups for myself? What's like, why is this so hard for me? And that's when I realized maybe I need to, I didn't call it boundaries at the time, but mm-hmm. boundaries would be the right word, as maybe I need to learn how to love me more. And that's a journey in itself. To me, that's a lifetime journey. However, there are things that I wanted to make sure, like I wanted to do things that I loved, not to for anyone else, but just for me, that would fulfill and fill up my cup. And through that, maybe and sustain them even when I was in a relationship. That was my challenge. I was like, you know what? I'm going to work so hard to do this. I need to sustain it after my relationship. And so it's so funny that we're talking about this now, but the reality is in our old normal, it was almost scary sometimes, depending on the type of person you are. We're both extroverted people when it comes to the social life, but we have introverted tendencies.
Mm-hmm.
But I find that pre-pandemic, we would fuel our extroverted selves more than our introverted selves. And we wouldn't give enough attention, and we would mute the introverted needs that we may have had, to the point where, you know, it might get uncomfortable to spend time with oneself. And so now I feel like we're, you know, in Canada, in Ontario, we're itching to be able to get back into the real world. But I feel like it's going to be almost a switch. Now we're so used to being in our introverted spaces, in our close bubbles that we've been keeping, in our close boundaries. We've really found a routine for ourselves with the parameters we've been given. And now we got to get back to feeling comfortable with that extroverted self and how to find that balance and still be true to yourself to keep those introverted boundaries that you need. If that makes sense.
It makes total sense, because, you know, I went out, you know, the Friday that Ontario opened into step one, and I went to the bar on that Friday night. And the amount of social anxiety that I actually felt was so weird, because that wasn't me pre-pandemic. If I went to a bar, I was lively and, you know, was anticipating to go. And I feel like with the pandemic, you create you let your introvert out a little bit, and you become, you know, I'm not going to say a hermit, but I mean, that's kind of what it felt like. I was working from home, living here, you know, everything kind of was just happening in this one small unit. And then, you know, to be allowed to go out and socialize, you know, when people would come up to me, you know, at first I was like, where's my mask, you know, like, and it gave me such a sense of social anxiety. And I'm like, remember, you know, you wanted this life back eventually. But the interesting thing I find is that now I want like a little bit of both. You know, a lot of people are saying, you know, during the pandemic, oh, I want to learn all these new things and I want to try these new hobbies. And I think some people, you know, really just kind of went through the pandemic, you know, binging Netflix and really not doing those things. And I kind of want to continue that trajectory. Like, the pandemic allowed me to focus in on things that I had never focused in on before, because I used work so much, more so than anything else, because it takes up 7.5 hours of your day, you know, as a distraction to stop doing a lot of the things. And then through the pandemic, I was like, oh, wow, you can accomplish a lot just by being at home, and you can save so much money, which is the biggest thing I think for a lot of people, was you can save so much money just being at home, cooking for yourself and kind of doing your own thing, that going back into the real world is a bit scary. And I think I created a version of myself in the pandemic, or I turned into a person that I actually really, really love. And I guess I'm a little scared that person goes away once, you know, normalcy comes back, because now you have to go back to work. Now there are parties, there are birthday parties, there are these social gatherings, there are these things. So you don't really have as much time to just kind of focus in on yourself. And that's a huge shift, I think.
It's funny because I think back to last summer. Tell me if you remember this. We're driving back from mom and dad's, yourself, Anish, and I, and it was at night. It was the evening. And we got into this heated discussion. And it was around the time last summer where people were having like these warehouse parties and like sneaking out and having them. And you were like, you got to let these people live. And, you know, like, you know, I don't blame them. And we have to have life. And there's not that many people dying from this. This is not the right thing. And then to hear you talk now, it just shows that you're allowed to evolve. You're allowed to change your opinion. You're allowed to have a different standpoint, because anyone who was listening to our heated car discussion last summer would not have predicted necessarily to hear the conversation we're having now. And I think that you're right in the sense that we have to make sure that as we step out into I guess, our new normal, which is a mix of who knows what. I haven't experienced it yet, so don't know. Stay tuned, listeners, that we still make the time, because we need to realize in this whole thing that we are a priority. When I say we, us as individuals need to make ourselves a priority. And that can't just be something that we did for a year. That needs to be something that we keep in mind to make time for ourselves. And I encourage that for everyone. I mean, I think everyone should have that self-development. Everyone should try to, no matter how uncomfortable it is, if you're not comfortable spending time with yourself, and I guarantee you, I've been there, done that. I've evolved a lot. Now I could spend hours by myself. It's fine. Yeah. But at the beginning, it's going to be uncomfortable because it's something you haven't allowed yourself to do. And when I say that, I mean, without the distractions of work, without the distractions of having a friend over or FaceTiming with someone. I'm talking about just you, yourself, and I guess, I don't know, you, yourself, and I in that.
Your two cats.
Like, exactly. Exactly.
I have two cats, so.
So it's so true. So, now that life is getting back to like the reality, and I too have a little bit of social anxiety going into it. I don't even know if it's social anxiety per se. It's just, I feel like it's so much effort. I feel like I'm so used to being home and seeing like my closest friends. And it's just like, athleisure wear, lounge wear, not having to worry about anything, not having to worry about being at a certain place at a certain time. Cause really, what's there to do anyways? To now having to put this effort in, I have to maybe dress up a little more and put my clothes that I haven't worn into use. I have to, maybe I'll wear some makeup. Maybe I'll actually do my hair. You know what I mean? Like those are things that I didn't have to worry about for over a year now. And so I feel like that effort piece is there. And then it's the awkwardness of, you see someone you haven't seen in a long time. So what do you do? Do you give them a hug? Do you give them the elbow? And I'm a hugger. I've always been a hugger prior. So the pandemic was really hard for me in that stance. So now it's just like, I don't know what to do. Like, I'm so awkward when you first see me because do I keep my distance? Are you uncomfortable? I'm trying to gauge the situation. It's just, it's a mess. Totally a mess. To switch topics a little bit. We're both in Toronto. And I also know that last summer we were talking about, it's so sad. All these places are closing. We're trying to support local. Like, I wonder what's going to replace it. Maybe it's going to give an opportunity for new restaurants to come around. And now we've been seeing a trend in the city, and all we've been seeing is new dispensaries popping up everywhere. I have yet to see a new restaurant pop up in my area. So if any of you are restaurant owners or chefs trying to open a restaurant, downtown core area would be great. Maybe a little more to the east end. There's lots of vacancies. There's lots of vacancies. But how do you feel about that?
I think it just showcases, I don't want to say that it's like showcases that, people need to deal. I don't know if that makes sense, but like, it's just, I'm a weed smoker. I'm putting it out there. And I think during the pandemic, I used it as a means to just deal, to get me through the day, to, just help me relax, to stop the wandering, to do a lot of that. And I think that's why dispensaries are making such a huge impact, especially on the east end. Like, I don't know if anybody has been out near King East, but wow, there are probably 5-6 new dispensaries that have popped up in the last month. And I really just think it's more about, people think it's a big money thing right now. I think the strong will survive, and you'll see, some of them shutting down and potentially getting replaced with things like what we really want to see. I mean, I'm not a dispensary person. So to see so many of them in places where there used to be such amazing mom and pop shops, we used to have so many great places just on Front Street, and now we have an A&W and 2 dispensaries. I mean, I think it, like I said, I think it just showcases how people needed to deal through the pandemic. I don't necessarily think that it's going to be a continuous trend. I think the strongest will survive, and those with the best deals will survive. And hopefully then we'll start to see a real change, because we're becoming more densely populated. You see condos being popped up everywhere, and to not have, the mom and pop restaurants and stores and stuff like that not being showcased and only showcasing, dispensaries, it's really sad to see, actually, because I didn't see this I didn't see that for this neighborhood, and I didn't think that that's where it would go.
I also feel like when people think about downtown, it's the reason why people who live in the suburbs travel downtown for a night out or for an afternoon is to experience culture, to experience different things that they might not be offered in the suburbs, right? So like
Yep.
you think about mom and pop shops and you think about the different cultured cuisines that we've had. That's what Toronto is about. It's about, embracing that culture. It's about experiencing that culture. It's about knowing which spot to check out. You know what I mean? And that's what the city has always been about from, I don't know, my entire life that I can think of. I mean, I grew up in the suburbs and I would be the 905er that would travel to the 416 to experience that. So I just, I hope that as things progress and open up, I hope that we'll see more, and business owners won't be afraid to start a business, or those entrepreneurs that have always wanted to make that shift will not be afraid to make that shift based on what just happened and what was deemed essential versus not essential. I just hope that that's one piece that we do get back, because it's one that I'm thirsty for sure.
I also encourage people to, like, go to your MPs and go to your city councilors. Like, me and Anish have, recently gone to one where they're trying to build a 39-story condo behind my building, which is, we live in a historical area, and, that's not necessarily what we want. And we actually went to the city council meetings for it and the development for it. And, recently a bylaw was implemented to only allow 30 stories within our region. So I do encourage people that, if you're seeing something in your neighborhood, like if you're seeing a whole bunch of dispensaries pop up, I mean, it's not like, go to your MP, go to your city councilor, they definitely can help in certain ways. And I found that process to be really helpful and really interesting, just to kind of see, how decisions are made and being a part of the process. Like, you would hear so many people from just the neighborhood talking about their opinions on, the development. And yes, this is the development of a condo, not necessarily the development of a dispensary, but it works the same way, right? They always want your opinions in the end because they want the vote too. So
it's so fascinating to see it, but it's just another reminder how advocacy done right does make a difference. And so to use the tools and the resources available and actually let people who need to hear your voice, who are able to to influence, actually know what your opinion is when it's impacting you. And if you don't speak up, but you complain about it, you're not helping anything. So yeah, definitely talk to your counselors, definitely talk to your MPs. They make a big difference.
I think the last year has really shown like what people's voices are capable of too, right? So if anybody's hesitant of that, I mean, I just found out that they might potentially be changing, Dundas Street, because of the whole Indigenous movement that's going on right now. And and it was just this guy, while I was watching him on CP24, he sent an email to the mayor, and the mayor considered it. And it was just as simple as sending an email to see the change that he wanted. And, now it's something that's actually in the news, and we might actually no longer have a Dundas Street because of that, right? So it works.
It definitely does. And I think that, yeah, voice definitely matters. We've seen all the things that have happened with so many people that have been coming into the news. And I don't want to dive too much into it, but I think having a voice matters, and just knowing that if it's something you feel, it's very likely something that other people feel. And if you can bring it to the attention of the right person, you'll be able to help make that change, as opposed to just muting it for yourself and letting things go on longer than they need to, or happening too late, right? Speaking of the world changing, speaking of advocacy, speaking of all of that stuff, you mentioned a breakup. You're now single. Dating world? How does that happen post-pandemic? What's the plan? Is it the online? Is it the natural organic? Is it you're still cool dating yourself?
I've been in relationships for like the last 15 years of my life. And The breakup happened during the pandemic. While it was tough, I think it taught me so much about self-resilience and self-reliance. And like I said, those attachment issues I got to, obviously deal with during that process, more so because I was forced to. Um, but um,
So you were forced to. What are you going to do? So I guess the plan is in the air of, when you might approach the dating thing again. You have been, you've been dating for a long time. To my listeners, she says 15 years. She's not, she's very youthful in her. She's actually younger than me. So, I mean, just putting that for context, I like to think I'm not old.
I'm so tired.
But you know what though? Dating until you find the right person is tiring, isn't it?
Yeah. I think it's tiring. I think the thing is that, everybody expects that when they find somebody that's going to be 100% perfect. And I just think that relationships are constant communication. It's constant, being honest with one another. It is because, I feel personally that you can potentially fall in love with maybe somebody else, and because they give you, that communication, that honesty, uh that's all you kind of need. For me right now, just because I've been going through the dating process so long, I was in a 7.5 year relationship. I just felt that at this point that, just meeting new people and loving myself and kind of just moving forward is right now more so the way to go. I am, if the opportunity comes, I would love the organic love. I feel like the last couple of ones have been online, so the organic thing would be awesome. Just somebody I knew, somebody from my past, or somebody you meet at a bar or something like that. It just randomly happens rather than kind of searching for it online, or like my first real relationship, we found each other on Craigslist before dating apps, before Tinder and any of that. We were going online on Craigslist to like meet each other, and that's just how that worked out. And so now there's all these like apps and stuff like that, which gets you connected to people really, really well. But I don't know, that's just not where my head's at this point. So I think, dating is secondary to me right now. I think I still need to work on, my attachments and making sure that I love myself wholeheartedly before I give myself to somebody else.
I also feel like it's really hard for someone else to be able to love you the way you want to be loved until you love yourself. And
Yeah.
I say that, as cliche as that sounds, I say it because it's what had to happen for me to find it. And funny enough, the story, but me and your bro, we didn't meet on like an app or anything like that. We met the old fashioned way at a wedding, well, reacquainted at a wedding. We met through mutual friends many, many years ago. Now I'm making myself sound old, but it's but it can happen. But I also feel like it also happens when you choose to not look for it. That's when it happens and surprises you. So I'm not against it, but I guess for our listeners, because I'm so close to you and I know how much work you've done, and I actually feel like you're not giving yourself even enough credit. You've given yourself some credit on this episode, not gonna lie, but I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit for how much you've put into wanting to build that relationship with you and to love you. I think what I would love for other people to be able to learn from you is, what are you thinking to do differently this time when you get into a relationship that maybe is that you've learned over the past year that you didn't do previously?
My friend told me that her dad said, you don't need to find a project. And I think that was my thing, was always finding like the project, the one to fix, maybe not even seeing in myself as somebody that deserves somebody of, who didn't need to be fixed, right? I always thought I needed to find somebody that needed to be fixed. And you take away so much of yourself by trying to fix this project. And the reality is that you can't fix anybody if they don't want to fix themselves, really. So unless and that's where I think things like communication and honesty come into the core of any relationship. Is if somebody's honest with you in terms of where they're at, who they want to be, what their 5-year goals are, stuff like that. I think that's what I'm looking for the next time around, because I think the people that I was with in the past didn't even really have a 5-year goal. I don't think they knew. And for me, I realized throughout my relationships and it's so sad because I gave so much security to, I think, the relationships that I had, but I never really felt that sense of security when it came from that person. Like, if I lost my job or if something happened to me, do I really feel like I'm the security I have in this person, like they could take care of me, they'd be capable of it? And I felt like that's something that I was definitely missing in my relationships. Was I just want to, I don't always want to be the caregiver. I realize that so much is I don't always want to be the one that has to fix their problems. I'd love them to be somebody who's capable for themselves, who can fix their own problems, who recognizes their own weaknesses and tries to make it better. That's what I really want.
I think that's so raw, but it's so true on so many different levels. And I think it's something that everyone goes through. I feel that sometimes we want to fix people because we're people pleasers, or we just want to do good, or we just think we can help them. And we think that there's so much potential in this person. Maybe it's attraction at first, and then they like, oh, they have everything, but like I can help them with this one thing and everything will be fine once they work on that one thing. And I think the thing that we need to learn is acceptance. What I've learned in my life, and I can't speak for everyone, so I can only speak for my own experience, is that when you can accept someone and be like, I'm okay if you don't change. I actually accept you for who you are. And that's with your brother. That's when it works. When you feel like everything but something else, it's okay if that person's not perfect, as long as you can accept them for their everything that they offer, whether those are the things that annoy you versus the things that are amazing for you. And you're not trying or needing them to change. If there's something that needs them to change, and it comes from them, then I think the situation's different. And they're like, can you help me with this? Whereas if we are the ones that point out to that person, you should really work on this. It's not from them. And if the idea is sparked because of us, I never think that it aligns well with that person, because they didn't notice it or think it was important enough previous to us. So I feel like that's so true, that you can't have a project. You have to be able to have acceptance. And then I think when we have acceptance, we also feel a sense of security, because we know we're accepted for who we are, because we're not perfect either. But if we're constantly trying to fix someone else, we know that we need fixing. And then we wonder, are we giving enough? Are we doing enough? Where can I improve? And we start to do that critiquing of ourselves. And that voice is probably one of the hardest voices to silence or to ignore or to reverse the dialogue with. So I think you're right. And I think that it does need to come from that other person. And it does come from being open. And being open is not easy. Being able to share what you need and be vulnerable and say, this is my plan, or I don't have a plan, or this is where I'm at. And this is what I want in 3 years. And you're entitled to change it. I just think that as long as it's honest, people sometimes feed us things that we want to hear. And that's more dangerous for both people than it is and the person saying that, because they're compromising what actually truly aligns with them and makes them happy, because they're just trying to say what you want. Like a small example is if I lie and say, this is the favorite way I like my eggs. Well, think about Julia Roberts, Runaway Bride.
Runaway Bride.
Yeah, right? And you think about how every guy, she had a different favorite egg. And the reason being is because she would never actually say what she wanted. She was always trying to please the other person and say what she thought they wanted to hear. The reason why those relationships didn't work is because she wasn't being honest with herself. So she could never actually be happy in that relationship.
For sure.
So
I 100% agree.
I don't know. That's my That's my food for thought on that one. But I do think that
Literally.
literally, but I do think that sometimes we need to set that example and we need to just let ourselves be open, and we might get burned in the process. But I feel that if we are consistent in saying what our boundaries are, what our deal breakers are, or what we need, that eventually someone will come in our life and be able to have that. And then they might have an amazing sibling and you have a great relationship that way too.
I mean, you always told me, especially last year, was that you have to see yourself as the prize. And it's not, sometimes it's not just about, you fighting for that other person. The other person should want to fight for you too, because you need to see yourself as somebody that's deserving of a person that wants you in that way as well, right? You are the prize in the end. And I think sometimes people forget that. And that's where those things like attachment issues come into play, because they forgot who they are throughout that process.
Or even scarier and even more frequently, it's not even they forgot who they are. They don't love themselves enough to see that they're valued to be that prize. And I think that when we don't give ourselves the time to spend time with ourselves, it becomes harder and harder for us to necessarily see our self-worth and how much we bring to the table. But we're so quick to point out our flaws and what we don't have and why we're blessed for that person to put up with us. And it makes that toxic relationship or the back and forth be even harder. And I find toxic relationships are the hardest to get over because there's so many things that it's unhealthy. So that it has that unhealthy extremes of amazing times and then the unhealthy extremes of hard times. And it's that attachment to that cycle. It's very hard to break, especially when you're in it. You don't necessarily see that you're in it and in that situation until you remove yourself out of it or until you're forced to be removed out of it. And I think that's why it's so challenging. Like you talk about attachment. I can so think about the times that I've cried myself to sleep over a guy that I should not have cried myself to sleep over. Or I did what I was willing to do to try to save that relationship, when in reality, that person should have seen what I bring and should have wanted to save it because it's me.
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, this was a very interesting living room conversation. Anything you want to add?
No, I just love the concept of filling up your cup. And like, I know you say that a couple of times on episodes, and I just think that that's something that more people need to live by, is filling your cup. Heartbreak is tough and it happens. Just, I never thought at that point that I was ever going to get out of it, that my mental stability, would ever come back, the emotions, I thought I would feel like that forever. And the more that I filled up my cup with my own personal goals and, even just like I said, doing things around the house, I think by doing that, you really kind of stop becoming so dependent and attached on others. I mean, in an unhealthy way. Healthy attachment's completely different, right? So just, when you're in those positions, just continue to fill your cup and, fill your partner's cup as well. But for me, I think it's more fill your cup up first, because they should be able to fill their cups up too.
And I think the other thing I would add to that analogy is that you'll be able to fill other cups when your cup is full and overflowing.
Sure.
But it's hard to pour from an empty cup, because then you're giving less and less. And the other aspect I would say is that if you're constantly feeling the need of having to fill your cup, then you have to fix the hole in your cup. And that's where all the work comes. And that's not easy. That's what you've been working on for the last year. And I've seen you grow and I've seen you blossom and I've seen you stick to it. And I think I really wanted listeners to hear our conversation, because I think your journey is more recent, but it also shows how you can do the small things that you might laugh at or might brush off when you hear it. But when you put it into practice and you actually give it a shot and change your approach or mindset about it, you might be surprised with how it serves you. It may not have to be a gratitude journal. It may not have to be every single day. it might just be, you know what, I'm going to write out my thoughts so that I can just let it out somewhere so I can show up and have this conversation better. And that makes the world of a difference. So I think, the walks, I know when you went for walks and hearing other voices because you didn't want to hear necessarily music sometimes, or listening to a podcast because it helped fill the room. Those are still steps towards making an effort to being comfortable with oneself. And I think that it's such a valuable lesson, and that's so much truth to it that I'm excited to have this conversation again a year from now for our listeners. I'll talk to you on the daily, but a year from now for our listeners, for them to be able to hear this episode and then hear where you've gone a year from now. Cause I know that I can only imagine how different it's going to be as the thunder goes in the background. No idea if our listeners are going to hear that. Yeah.
Can you get a little storm going on out there?
So, to our listeners, I want to thank you for tuning in today. If you want to support us, you can definitely check out our website at www.weas.ca, and you can find out more episodes. You can learn how to buy us a coffee, sign our Patreon, all that fun stuff. But I want to thank you again for listening to this episode. Anisha, thank you so much for being so raw and authentic in this conversation. And I'll see you guys next time.